Hello everybody, I'm Cristina and I'm stepping in for Paloma. She has already told you. So we are going to move on to the next panel named Building a Clinical Trials Environment to Support Inclusivity, which will be moderated by Francis Shiely, PhD, Professor of Clinical Trials, HRV Clinical Research Facility and School of Public Health, University College Cork and SENSITISE Project Coordinator. Welcome.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. Estoy encantada de estar aquí en Madrid and bienvenido a todos en línea and online y aquí. So welcome everybody. Inglés. Un poquito de español, inglés now desde ahora. So welcome everybody, and we have a great panel lined up here for this evening, and I've been asked to just make sure that you're all awake and ready to go. I'll endeavour to be as energetic as my colleague Sean was earlier when I'm moderating, but I have the stick to keep you all in shape. So without further ado, I'm going to ask the panel to come up to the podium or the seats here. So we have Laura Pioppo, Fidelma Dunne, Rosario Perona, Daniel Ruíz, and MRIA Dutarte. And I'm not going to do them an injustice by trying to introduce them. I'll let them say a few words each themselves. So we might just ask to bring the microphones close to you. It can be difficult to hear at the back. And maybe just ask the audience as well, just to be respectful of the speakers and try not to be talking when they're talking as well, because it's hard. It can be hard to hear. So we'll have our I suppose one of the key things about panel discussions like this is we're dependent on our audience. So it'd be really great to have questions from the audience and also from people that are joining us online. So don't be afraid to add to the chat box online or to put up your hand if you have a question. So our panel today is Building a Clinical Trials Environment to Support Inclusivity, and I'll start at the other end, Laura, maybe to introduce herself first of all, please.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me well? Yes, good afternoon again. Laura Pioppo, I'm a pharmacist by training. I've been working at the European Medicine Agency for the last 15 years in different roles, starting with the supervision and the monitoring of supervision activities on compliance, so good clinical practice inspections and pharmacovigilance inspections. Then I followed the implementation of the CTR with the development of CITIS, the Clinical Trial Information System. I've been the lead for the transparency aspect and the revision of the transparency rules. And for the last couple of years, I've been the program manager of ACT-EU, this initiative to accelerate clinical trials in the European Union, closely working with the colleagues at the European Commission and the member states, and with the advisory group with our stakeholders representatives. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Rosario Perona. I actually work here in the Instituto de Salud Carlos III. I'm a deputy director in advanced therapies. For my background, I'm a pharmacist. I work in the last 20 years in research, my own laboratory at the Research Council, working mainly in cancer and rare diseases. That's what my interest in equity and other aspects that will be treated in this. Before I have in the last 5 years working here at the Instituto de Salud Carlos III, first evaluating research projects and research human resources that we finance here in the Institute, and now I'm during the Advanced Therapies as a deputy director. Also working with Screen and other platforms together with Daniel in the following the work of Green and of some other infrastructures on personalized medicine. Thank you.
Yeah, it's my turn. I think that it could be better if you can sit it to be more comfortable because you are with injured, so you can sit if you want, preferably.
Thank you.
And then, well, this is Daniel Ruíz Iruela. I'm Deputy Director of International Relationships here in the Instituto de Salud Carlos III. I don't have so much track record in research because I'm chemist, analytical chemist. I've been working in Eli Lilly, it's a pharmaceutical company, during more than 4 years here in Alcobendas. I've been also involved with the Innovation Funding Agency, CDTI, working 2 years in New Delhi, in India. And then I come back to Spain, working for the Ministry of Science and Innovation in the State Research Agency, promoting R&D and transnational calls. And then I passed my exams, and I am civil servant from this institute, and I'm honored to coordinate the international department here at Instituto de Salud Carlos III. Also, my department is involved in different transnational calls, and also my department is the main contributor to the ECRIN initiative and other R&D infrastructures at the European level, not only ECRIN, but also BBMRI, ELIXIR, EATRIS, and others related with health. And I am very honored to be here in this table trying to answer these sessions today. So thank you to all of you.
Thank you, Daniel. And Maria?
Thank you. I'm Maria Dutarte. I'm the director of EUPATI, that stands for the European Patients Academy on Therapeutic Innovation. And we are an educational initiative enhancing the capacity of patients and patient representatives to be partners in research. So we have training programs and an online toolbox for patients. But we also have courses for researchers on how to meaningfully involve patients. And we have a close partnership with ECRIN and are also involved in the IHI Ready project.
Thanks, Maria. And Fidelma?
I'm Fidelma Dunne. I'm from the west coast of Ireland, and I'm a practicing endocrinologist. I've been working in the area of diabetes and pregnancy for about 25 years. So I have been running the clinical service, and then alongside that doing clinical trials, cohort studies, observational studies in these women in terms of screening and using technologies and IMPs in their management. In the last 3 years, I've been running the clinical trial network for diabetes for the country, and in the last 16 months, I've been director of the Institute for Clinical Trials at our university. So at the moment, international trials coming to Ireland, either in technologies or IMPs, is difficult. So Ireland is not seen as a go-to nation to conduct a clinical trial. The reason for that is that the processes and timelines around getting regulatory and ethical approval are not reliable. They're certainly not speedy. And then once you've got that, the timelines around getting contracts signed between sponsors and the health system, the HSE, is also difficult. So that is retarding trials coming to Ireland across all disciplines. So I've been working locally and on a national body to try and identify what the barriers are. Is the narrative true or false around these claims? And what are the solutions to try and make these timelines, one, reliable, and two, reproducible, so that Ireland becomes a go-to place to do trials?
Thanks, Fidelma. Yeah, I can echo that. We've lots of amazing people ready to take on, and collaborate on trials, but it's challenging, and it's great to have people like Fidelma there working on that, and ECRIN as well, supporting those processes to get change. So just as a reminder to our audience, then we have funder expertise on the panel, regulatory expertise, we have a principal investigator, and we have patient representative. So I'll start off first of all, and maybe you can be thinking of your questions in and online as well, please. So I'm going to jump into the funders, because we have two of them, and ask them, how are funding bodies incentivising inclusive research practices at present? And Rosario or Daniel?
Okay, from the clinical trials point view and financing of those trials, we have three strategies that are complementary. In one side, we are financing and supporting the activities of SCREEN, that you almost very well known, which is a research infrastructure with nodes that are in almost all the communities, in the autonomous communities of Spain, and work with public hospitals, the national health system, and provide scientific and technical support and is also integrated into SCREEN. In the other side, we had financed last year the creation of new research clinical units all over the peninsula, because we know that not all the autonomous communities have the same facility. There are places where it's very isolated. People are not able to be involved in clinical trials, so they have a discrimination in this aspect, in this point of view. So we created a call of 45 million euros, where we have 12 new research units in hospitals where they don't have it, but they have an area of 200,000 inhabitants, and also improving the existing ones. So we have 12 new created units and 51 improving the work of the existing ones. So that those units will work in the future together with the SCREEN to collaborate. And finally, we have been financing since 2018 clinical trial research in supporting research projects on clinical trials, independent clinical trials, non-profitable clinical trials, and try to include among the criteria to include the trials like orphan drugs, pediatric and elderly population, also the underrepresentative population in the clinical trials favors the financing with advanced therapies, orphan drugs, as I said, and new repurposing drugs, and etc. So we are trying to be very much inclusive in between different populations that are underrepresented, also the pediatric and elderly people. And with this year, we have financed 150 projects, more or less, with more than 100 million euros in the last years. So we are very proud of that, and also SCREEN is involved in the following these projects and following and helping in the development of these projects. And I have to say that in the last years, almost 50% of these projects were devoted to advanced therapies, which is great, because this is the most difficult kind of diseases that can be treated, rare diseases, etc., in this sense. So this is more or less.
Thanks, Rosario. And Daniel, we met briefly there. We spoke a little bit about the EFFECT trial call, and there was a focus on inclusivity in that as well. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that, maybe?
Well, when I've been thinking about inclusivity in the EFFECT trial call, I not be thinking about the definition that you have already listened this morning with all the psychologies and theories in the debate. But as you might probably know, ERA for Health Partnership is a co-fund program for the European Union with more than 37 partners, with more than, 24 countries, with almost 300 million euros put in place for joint transnational calls. But EFFECT trial is a pilot joint transnational calls in clinical trials. So inclusivity here is to put in common at least 13 countries. That is a huge and a complex problem. So inclusivity here is to put funding agencies in common in a joint transnational pilot call in clinical trials. So this is what I'm going to talk about. I don't know if you know about this transnational call, but covers, I think, that 4 thematic areas. Please help me, because you have been one of the evaluators here, and my team is also here, tries to help me a little bit. Covering metabolic disorders, cardiovascular disease, non-communicable respiratory diseases, and nutrition and lifestyle, trying to respond what the Commission said about, well, after the COVID outbreak, what's the gap for the national healthcare system, and what could be our competitiveness in R&D pharmaceutical clinical trials. And most of you probably have read, not all, the Draghi report that put in place how could be the importance of clinical trials at the European level for the competitiveness. So this call is the response of that. One of examples trying to put money in common, complexity in bureaucracy, methodology, funding mechanisms, and I consider that it's going to be one of the examples of success that we are going to evaluate, assess, and try to reinforce. I am very proud of this because the Instituto de Salud Carlos III is the main coordinator of the ERA for Her partnership and also one of the thinking teams in the international call. I have here my team, Astrid Valencia and Sara Garcia, and also Cristina Nieto, one of the people involved in this complexity transnational call. I think that we are covering not only thematic area, but also the scope in comparative, pragmatic, is randomized, interventional, and pragmatic comparative effectiveness, multi-country international clinical trials. So, well, it's a difficult transnational call, but I think that it's going to be very important for the future. And it also covers diversity, a big number of patients, because 13 countries, it's huge, and we are covering population. I also consider that patients are involved in the design of the call, not only at the end of the project, but in the mindset of the preparation of the consortium. So we hope that this pilot call could be a success, and we could repeat it in the following years, trying to give the response of the European Commission and the European Research Arena expect from ours. And, well, for the first intervention, I think that I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And just wondering, is there any questions from the audience? So we have two here. So Sean first and then Joanne. Oh, Joanne first and then Sean.
Thanks. My question. Can you hear me? Yeah. It's in relation to the funding for inclusivity. So I guess as we try and include more in our academic studies particularly, we'll have more variability, so we'll need to increase the number of patients on the study, or the number of recruits on the study, which then drives up the cost. So is there a recognition, from the funders and the commercial companies, I guess, as well, that in order to do this, which is absolutely the right thing to do, that we will need some incremental funding?
Rosario, you can start.
So all the studies that we do are not non-commercial studies in a way, because we know that the problem is that some commercial studies are not so inclusive in some of the aspects that we try to include the patients, like the underrepresented population that we have always in every country, that we have, like the children and the elderly people. So I hope that those kind of studies can really push and show the results of being so inclusive in these clinical trials, and to give an example to the companies that they must do this, because it has is rewarding, because we can get to the population where they need advanced therapies, where they need special treatments, and etc. You can be repurposing drugs for this population, and also, so at least I think that is an example for the companies to see how the things can be very well done and can be spread over the opinion of the companies, and I hope it can serve for something.
Also, regarding the ERA for Health pilot call, is already running the call, so we don't have numbers to assess what is happening, because I think that we have now opened the second phase stage that is going to close in June, and it's very early to know, to give you more answer about that, but we hope the same situation.
Thank you. Sean, you have a question?
Thanks. And Joanne's question was a very good one. And in the UK, so I would call it financial signalling, is what I would call it. The funders give a signal that this is important by saying there's money. And in the UK, the big public funder has just made it mandatory to tell them what you are doing about diversity, and they expect a separate budget line on diversity. So that is very strong, I think, financial signaling that this is something we expect and demand from you. And I think that's important. That's not my question, though. My question is also linked to funding, but perhaps, Maria, you might have something to say too, which is, we heard a lot today about trust and building relationships and working with groups that historically we may not have worked with before, and that takes time and needs to be sustained. And most of our funding in the academic sector comes from projects, which means that before the project you have no money. So how would we sustain and build relationships over a long time, not just linked to a project, but over a long time? And that, I know from all the bits of work we've done, is the most important problem for building stronger relationships between at least researchers and diverse ethnic communities, is lack of sustainable funding that is not directly connected to projects. I wondered whether the panel had any thoughts on how to reduce the size of that problem.
I wonder, would we start with Maria on that one to answer?
I think it's more related maybe to the funding.
That's funders.
Yeah.
I can answer a little bit, because we have here in Spain one example. This is not a self-promotion, but it is finally. We have here in Spain 35 institutes of health research promoted by the Institute of Health Carlos III to connect universities with hospitals, primary healthcare centers, technological centers in only one asset center, R&D center, in the clinical site center. So we are trying to promoting not only verbally, but also financing them annually about projects, but also as structural funds for R&D without project. We launched a pilot call that calls Fortalece, like it's reinforcement, health reinforcement, that the best 12, I think, Institute of Health of Research here in Spain could have like a 2.5 million for 4 years just to develop 4 thematic areas in R&D. So this connection could be a good example that if you create a good environment, a good whole with money from national perspective, and also performing well with platforms like Screen, more units in clinical trials, you can have the best scenario to promote that. But you have to be at national level committed with them, because it's very difficult to create that entire that ecosystem that we are promoting since 2004. Yeah, almost 20 years back, to establish the connection between clinician scientists, to promote clinician scientists to develop their career not only in the assistance with patients and family, and also putting them in their mind the initiative to be a researcher as well, because they are connected with patients, they are connected with families. So if you establish this ecosystem, it could be more sustainable, and you don't need more, matchmaking activities with them.
I wonder, could I ask Fidelma, who has worked in trials for many years, about sustaining that engagement with patient groups? Fidelma?
Okay, so looking at academic trials, I presume it's the same right throughout Europe. You get your grant, and a percentage of the grant goes in overheads to your university. I think that if there was an edict coming from the European Union to say, EDI is really important in trials, you need to put in place a system whereby you're addressing this proactively on an ongoing basis, I think we could demand from our universities that a percentage of the overheads come back to focus on EDI. And if all academic clinicians were getting a set amount back from their overheads, then a pot of money would build up and you could use that proactively for ongoing EDI. Similarly, for academic trials coming into a location where they're going to get paired up with a PI and an institute to deliver that clinical trial, the setup cost for that academic trial has, money for A, money for B, money for C, and so forth. I think all those industry-led trials could indeed contribute a proportion of the setup costs to a fund that then goes on to develop in that institution the long-term plan for EDI. So I think everybody involved needs to contribute to the pot, but the pot needs to be ring-fenced then to continue with the EDI activity. So, for example, with me, having built up something with the migrant community, that's of importance to everybody else in our institute. The same with the traveller group, the same with, people suffering from obesity. All those groups, are important for other clinical trials. So it really is important that you don't lose that momentum, but that you continue to build it. So I do agree with you, a project gives you X amount, but you need that baseline to keep the activity going. And I think there's a way to do that in the academic world and also in the industry partnerships. But people need to sign up to it, and the mantra needs to come from the European Union to say, we're watching this space, this is important, we're measuring it, we're going to be asking you for stuff. And if it's coming across very loudly from the European Union, we'll all sit up and smarten up and do the job.
Thanks, Fidelma. I might just go to online. Christine, is there? No, not yet. So maybe we can encourage our online audience to contribute some questions as well. Bruno?
Yeah, I shared the examples of what we call Air Site Alliance, which is not at all something that we own as Roche. We just get some sites upskilled to have this community connection, and then that enable them to be more attractive, to bring trials. So I think that as part of also Ready, that we will hear a bit later, I think the whole vision is to have sustainability, which is that we prove and develop specific measures that have an impact, and then proactively we prepare to make that sustainable beyond Ready. So I really hope that Ready will bring sustainable solution for example, community engagement beyond specific projects.
But I would say even if you looked at the same journey for PPI, that started probably 2 decades ago. We all did a little bit, nobody really knew what they were doing, then we all get educated, then we start enacting it. And now, funders are asking you for the line item for PPI. What are you doing? This is the amount of money you're getting, and show us what you're going to do with that. And then, when you go to publish whatever you've been working on, the publishers are now asking for how did PPI contribute to that. So I think the journey for EDI needs to follow a similar journey, but it's going to take time. So it's a proactive approach, I think, from funders, from academics, industry partners, journal editors. Everybody needs to be talking about the same thing. So it needs to be a cohesive approach, I think.
So a community approach, and we have Irish funder here in the audience. I'm thinking, our clinical research facilities that coordinate a lot of that, might be a great place to start to. It's finding the groups and the appropriate patient groups, but it's keeping them engaged. And so our funder is funding a PhD at our university that I'm supervising, and not just looking at engagement of patient-public involvement, but looking at the retention. And it's kind of the same, as you were saying, Fidelma, for inclusive research as well. You engage those groups, but how do you retain them? And funding, as Sean has pointed out, is a key part of that as well. So I'm going to ask Maria. I feel Maria and Laura have been a bit neglected here, so I'm going to ask Maria, what kind of communication or outreach makes a patient representative feel engaged or welcomed in research?
Thank you for the question. I think ultimately it's if they can relate to it, if they find themselves in that communication, if they can identify with it. And I think I noted down another speaker mentioned today, I see people who look like me in the communications, in the materials. And that was a very powerful message to me. But if I may, I could also elaborate a little bit about the importance of education and training in this area. And what you just said resonates with me is that it's ultimately about transforming the way clinical trials are conducted. And education and training has everything to do with this at every level. And first of all, I think we also heard that design is the starting point. And in the past few years, we have, through patient organizations' efforts, but also efforts by, for example, EUPATI, been enhancing patient involvement in the design of clinical trials through education and training. So the EUPATI program is one example of that. And we see that there's more and more understanding around the benefits of this kind of co-design. And one of them is, of course, then understanding the patient insights and minimizing the burden on patient communities. But then overall, we can look at the different technical skills that are also going to be then in focus for clinical staff. And today we already have some competency frameworks that already mention diversity as a key element. I would invite everyone to look up the Joint Task Force for Clinical Trial Competency. It's a well-known competency framework for clinical researchers and clinical staff developed by the Multi-Regional Clinical Trials Center in the US. And we are currently part of a global initiative to enlarge this competency framework by adding the patient partnering competencies, and diversity is definitely one item there. So looking at the different technical skills, soft skills that people need in order to be implementing a patient-centric approach, but also the diversity aspects. And when it comes to training of clinical staff, I have also heard today many good real-world cases, and I think that is the best way to learn, is to listen to success stories, but not only success stories, maybe even failures and challenges that people have encountered. And so maybe in this space, the kind of traditional learning and education approach is maybe not the most helpful, but rather learning from others, learning from peers, learning by doing and sometimes failing. And then I come to the last point is really the building the trusting partnerships. And I think it's a key element here. And I really appreciate the question on how we make this sustainable. But then maybe looking into the training aspect in creating these partnerships, which also the IHI Ready project is trying to do through many different targeted training programs. So we see also patient organizations as a key unit in capacity building. And so in IHI Ready, we are going to build training programs for the patient organizations and their leaders, so that they can also be building those bridges between researchers and the patient communities they represent. We are also looking into building awareness programs for the general public, and then also trainings for the clinical staff that are mainly then focusing on the cultural competencies and the other soft skills. So in this space, it's really focusing on patients as partners and looking at all the different skills and trainings that are required to then fully implement that attitude.
Thanks, Maria, for a very comprehensive answer. Laura, maybe I'll turn to the audience just in case we have a question there before anybody. Yes, Josephine.
And I'm glad you mentioned PPI because the NIHR in the UK is really hot on funding that, although a lot of what I would call seed funding has gone. So we expect research projects to come even at an early stage with a PPI plan and involvement. That costs. And there is a gap in funding, and I think there's going to be a problem because there are more financial pressures on the health systems. I'm particularly looking at the UK, but I know that there are certain things that are going to be sidelined. And if we're not careful, it will be things like EDI and PPI because they will be seen as nice to haves. And the whole thing around sort of health injustice and so on and so forth will come second to actually just health full stop. So that's just more a reflection. And I think that we really do need to hold people to account that if we expect projects to come with a PPI plan, then they need to provide seed funding so that that's right from the start, because it's not fair to expect organisations to do that unfunded because we should be funding patients. So that's just a reflection.
Thanks, Josephine. Might just come to Laura. Or you mentioned in your talk this morning ACT-EU, and the focus is to make Europe a hub for trials. And I'm just wondering how inclusivity practices could impact that and add value.
Yes, thank you for the question. Indeed, attractiveness is one of the benefits that we are considering as part of the ACT-EU initiative, together with impactfulness, how impactful are the clinical trials that we conduct in Europe, and the time. We have to be quicker and faster and not necessarily to use the whole timelines of the regulation for the authorization of the trial and to start then the trial. But going back to attractiveness, yes, all this discussion that we are having today on inclusivity and representativeness can really help us to render the European Union a more attractive place. If we have more flexible protocols, as we were discussing this morning, allowing the inclusion of patients also of underrepresented and underserved population, the benefit would be to have more patients taking part to the trial, so having trials that are more statistically powered as well, and overall contributing this way to the clinical research and also to fill those gaps also on health disparities. So would be really, really welcome. When it comes to ACT-EU, I presented after launch the priorities, and for now the clinical trials regulation has an important role. But this topic on diversity, equity and inclusion is something that for sure we have to consider for the next revision of the work plan, also in collaboration with the other regulatory bodies, so with the European Commission and the Member States. It's something that has been presented during the multi-stakeholder platform advisory group meetings that I mentioned earlier before. We had few presentations on these topics, and I think it's something in dialogue with our stakeholders that can really be defined in the next revision of the work plan to have a dedicated line of work. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Any further questions from our... Thank you.
I have a question for Dr. Perona and Dr. Iruela. What is the position, if any yet, of the Institute Carlos III regarding to advocate for having clinical trials, on clinical trials calls in other partnerships? Because now is the discussion of the partnership on personalized medicine and others. And that means that it is very important also for the sustainability of the clinical trials, a scenario to have more than one instrument of funding. And the other partnerships are relevant also for that. Thank you.
Well, right now, what is interesting about the clinical trials that we're financing, that we have one is structure that is screen. Screen is helping in all the regulator activities and in all these clinical trials that we are financing. So the clinical trials are cheaper, so are more sustainable because they take care of all the of the research and the organization, the planification, the technical support of this trial. So this helps sustainability. At this point, we haven't think about cooperating with other entities in contributing to these clinical trials because, we have the rule of the administrative and government regulations. But I think these trials are sustainable because we have a structure that is screened, that is helping all of them to develop the projects. Otherwise, they will have much more expensive in this sense. So I think that having these two components of the machinery of clinical trials, also we involve patients also in the evaluation of the trials. Participation of patients is from last 6 or 7 years. They are participating in the evaluation and contributing to the knowledge of what is doing, how things are done, and evaluation the following of the trials also. So, but at this point, we haven't think about, not nationally, I speak nationally, not internationally.
Well, in terms of the position in the partnerships, I think that one of the key elements is not to talk about sustainability. That is a big word here, that means cuts at the end, cuts of funding. But I think the European Commission is focused on competitiveness. Now we are discussing at the European level not to have these FP10 more programs, just we have a competitive fund in order that we can evaluate and assess the impact. And I think that this is the key element. Not the sustainability of the money, but yes, what is happening with the R&D projects, with the clinical trials projects, the implementation, and all the results of FP10 and other health programs, EU for Health, Digital Europe. So the key element is not to promote calls or funding proposals, just to focus on the assessment and the evaluation and the impact of the competitiveness. And in this case, clinical trials is one of the examples that if we are using well the money in this aspect, not only in the area for health as a pilot code, but in other partnerships like personalized medicines, rare diseases, we can also assure competitiveness for the industry, for the regulators, for the patients, for the families, and to give the European community solutions for the medical needs that we have here. So I think that the key element is to promote not only the excellence that is already here, but the impact with results, as we can see in those examples. We have launched a pilot called in clinical trials, very complex, very difficult, with bureaucracy, with bottlenecks. We will see what is happening, but I think that the key element is to assess, to evaluate the results, rather than talk about sustainability. Let's check the results, the impact that we will have with this kind of call, and then improve, erase, recreate, redesign, involve more policymakers, patients, families, and we will see, and we assure the competitiveness of Europe, not only in R&D environment, but also in the industry level. This is our point of view at the Instituto de Salud Carlos III.
Go ahead, Pam.
Yeah, I'm going to be slightly devil's advocate here. So in commercial clinical trials, they're competitive, and they're competitive across sites and across countries. And you want to get the first patient in, and you want to, maybe you've only got an opportunity to recruit 10 patients. Are you as a site going to push for those EDI targets, or are you going to get the first 10 patients that turn up? And because that's how you're paid. And how does the funder change those targets so they say that it's not just the first 10 patients? So how do you make sure in that way you make sure the EDI is included in your patient recruitment. It might be included in your plan, but how do you make sure it's in your actual recruitment of patients?
Thanks, Pam. The funders are really under the cosh here, but your question resonates. Maybe for Fidelma, yeah, your question resonates because yesterday, or was it today, talking about the capping on some sites, and in my mind I was thinking exactly what you're thinking. How is that going to work, and what if the other sites actually don't recruit? Do you go back again then and try to reopen those, or logistically how does it work? Maybe Fidelma, you could.
I think you bring up a very valid point, and if I was controlling the budget, I would incentivize sites to bring in the diversity that is required to expand the knowledge in that disease area by funding this trial in the first place. So I think the funders need to know what is the type of patient that needs to be included in this trial to answer the question. The person bidding for the money needs to tell the funder the type of patients that need to be recruited. And I think the funder, be that the European Union or be that an industrial partner, needs to prioritise the diversity that's required by giving you additional benefits or funds so that you will go after those populations. Because I agree with you, competitive funding, if you have a delayed start, you might only get one patient in. You want to get 10, you can get 10, but hey presto, it's closed straight away because it's competitive. So if you're only getting the same value per patient, whether you're the standard patient or the diverse patient, you'll go after the standard patient. Of course you will. You'll get your 10 patient in, you'll fulfill your contract, your targets, and away you go. So it has to change. Otherwise, diversity and inclusion in practice won't happen, in my opinion.
Yeah, actually here in Spain, we push, and it's a benefit for the project, as far as include underrepresented populations in the project. That's one of the big things about this kind of clinical trials, because we try to push this kind of like pediatric, elderly, other kind of underrepresented population, and those are going to be more benefit to be funded in our goals.
Can I just add to that? And I'm just wondering what the panel's view would be. So I know our national funder asks about when you're applying for the definitive intervention scheme, have you conducted a systematic review or scoping review? And it's about identifying the groups. So often when you're engaging with others that are doing research, I'm just part of the designing of that. So how do I know the relevant people that should be in this trial? So I'm just wondering what the panel thinks, should it be mandatory that a scoping review, systematic review at least be conducted before a trial is proposed to ensure that we are reaching these, the groups that we should be reaching in the trial in the particular disease area? Do you want to start, Fidelma?
Well, I think if you're applying for funding to HRB to do a definitive intervention, you really need to know your population. So, starting the process without knowing your population is a bad way to start, I think. So, if I was the funder, I would be almost assuming that the investigator knows their population, and within their project plan, they will demonstrate that to me. I think putting in these specifics, you have to do A and you have to do B and you have to do C, sometimes will put off an experienced researcher because they just don't maybe have the time to do those additional things. And I think that's a pity, really. And doing another systematic review may not be required because there might be a fairly relative one that's available in the literature. So I'm not sure putting these barriers to people is the way to do it. I think the PI needs to demonstrate that they understand the population they want to study, understand the diversity of the population, and then the application form needs to ask those questions, in my opinion.
Yeah. Maria, do you have anything about understanding the population to add to that? Anybody else?
Dale, Rosario.
So I agree with that. I mean, we try to push, but it's essential that the researcher knows the disease and now how the disease is affecting the different elements in the population in general, and they make a good argument for the clinical trial. We try to push that, but I mean, we don't get with it maybe 20 projects per year, but we're trying to do that. So if the project and the evaluation project is the disease very well developed, they know exactly, and some of the projects have given to some CAR-Ts different strategies on products that are interesting and are going to be used in the clinic, etc. So the basic thing is that, as she says, that the clinician or the researcher knows very well the disease and which populations suffer the disease and how can they benefit most of them.
Okay. So no further barriers, but so knowing the population. Go ahead, Maria.
One point maybe to consider in that early stage is to see if there's community-led data available and to see if that has value at this stage too. Patient communities have gathered a lot of these insights and often even systematic data. So I would also promote looking into that as well.
Okay. Thanks, Maria. Very valid point. Yep. So, Christine, we have a question online.
I think that it's relevant to what was said at the beginning of the meeting, and what you mentioned is a way to make, I would say, more sustainable this approach of being inclusive is also involves some scientists that usually are not involved in clinical research. So meaning, for example, social scientists, sociologists, anthropologists that could help. So meaning that also the team making more inclusive is more inclusive. So it's maybe, and also related to education, because then it's also how to educate those people to work on clinical research. So just one comment from the audience.
Mm-hmm. So that's a very valid point. It's that a community of researchers, that it's a broad team, and I think we're sort of beating that drum for a long time, that trials have to be with a community of people, and that is many groups, including social scientists. I suppose another thought. I'm having lots of thoughts. I'm thinking, in my own situation in Cork, the whole thing of competing time to conduct trials, and where are not even sure it's a question in the sense that we have scientific priorities, logistical priorities, and so where does the priority of inclusivity fit in then as well with all of that? I think many investigators feel overwhelmed with the requirements, I guess, of what has to be done. Maybe Fidelma might.
Oh yeah. So it's all back to education, I think, again. I would say at the moment, EDI is not high on the priority. Certainly in Ireland, certainly in the institutes I work in, the clinical research facilities, EDI hardly gets a mention. So if we're really serious about EDI has to start at the top. So the institute of trials you work in has to have a charter that says they're interested in EDI. There has to be a training program within the institute. I don't think we have one of those. I think when we talk about training, we talk then about the training of the research team. And that's great, but the head of the research team is usually the PI. If the PI isn't trained in EDI won't go anywhere. So I would put my hand up and say, don't forget the PIs. They may be older in age, they may be older in experience, but they're probably not up to speed on EDI. So it has to come from the PI. So if there is communal training for a project on EDI and the PI buys into it, you will get EDI in that trial. If it doesn't happen like that, you'll get tokenism and you won't move the dial any forward. So that's the first thing about EDI. So it has to be it has to be for everybody. It has to be done in groups, I think, the project lead and their group. And I think you do need to have EDI in the diversity of the team you assemble to attract the right patients in. So if you have an Asian nurse, she's much more likely to recruit some Asian patients for you than you, the Caucasian, middle-class, white PI. So I think having a diversity in the team who's delivering clinical trials themselves is really important. And then the third thing you asked was about where does the time come to do all of this? So again, I would say if a PI who's a full clinician with no academic time given to them, they need to know in advance, before they sign up to do that, to be PI for that trial, what is actually identified in GCP. And it's up to people like me who've done that to take that person aside and say, hey, presto, do you understand what you're signing up to? You have a full clinical program. Do you think that you can do that? I don't think that full-time clinicians should take on the role of PI. I think it's just disastrous. You get protocol deviations, you get adverse events, you get patients unhappy, you get dropout from clinics. It just doesn't work. So, you know, that person with the knowledge of the disease could perhaps team up with an academic partner who's not knowledgeable in the disease but has some protected time, so that you have co-PIs delivering that trial. The other way around it is that health systems recognise that research is important and delivering clinical trials is important, and then they allocate X amount of money for regions or for locations, and people who are on full clinical trials bid to be in that pool where they get buyout of some of their clinical time. But it's not possible to do an IMP regulated trial as a full-time clinician with no guided time. Mm-hmm. I think, but I mean, people in the audience, maybe Sean or other people might disagree with me, but I think it's just opening a can of worms and disasters, and doesn't go well for patients then, and then, you know, you've dissatisfied patients and dropouts, and that's not what you want.
Mm-hmm. Laura, oh yeah, Maria, go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
Just a brief comment. So I think everyone in the room would agree that the purpose of research is to produce high quality evidence. And I think the key is to then understanding that DEI or EDI is creating better evidence, and it is better science, and we heard it today. It's not just the right thing to do. It just makes sense. So if diversity is not high on the agenda, it means that this link is missing, that people have not understood that DEI brings better evidence. And that was just what I wanted to say.
Maybe one reflection from my side is that all this very insightful feedback and discussion are making me think that it is a joint effort really of all the parties, and it's nice to see how all of us really, we play a role to make it high on the agenda. So regulators for what we can do, and we have also heard this morning the nice presentation about how the ethics committee can also influence this, as well as the national competent authorities that are assessing the dossier. The sponsors also, they play a key role, and also we have heard about the PIs and when they act as a sponsor and how they can contribute, and also the patients themselves. How can we increase the accessibility of the information to the patients, and with the trial map that we mentioned this morning, and through the dialogue that we have with patients' organization, hopefully we can cascade this information to the patients group so that they are aware. And we have also heard about involvement of specific experts. So it's really a joint effort, and all this can only be achieved with a dialogue similar to the one that we are having today to make it more concrete and realistic as a priority.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking about, all the time talking about broadening our, trial team. It takes, don't they say it takes a village to raise a child? It also takes a village to design a trial and implement it and make sure that it happens. Daniel?
Yeah, just to summarize, because I do agree with my colleagues here. As a funding agency, we are not leaving behind these topics. I mean, we are creating a call bottom up. I mean, talking to each other. So, for example, to the effect trial, we organize a seminar with different stakeholders, trying that everything is, all the information is put in the table to create a joint transnational call. Regarding inclusivity, I think that one of the most problems here is that in Europe, most of the people don't rely on science. So we are living fake news, we are living people that don't fully agree the results of science, and if we are not cutting down this kind of sense, putting that you have to trust in our system, try in our national healthcare system, in the European healthcare system, in our researchers, in the teams, all of them, it could be very difficult to increase the number of patients, the voice of them, minority groups, if we are living this scenario. So education is one approach, but also insist of the scientific evidence of the R&D that we are living in Europe.
Yeah, very good point. So this is my opportunity now just to plug the SENSITISE project, because Fidelma said that there isn't training education, and hey presto, we're just developing it. So with Jitka that you met earlier, Sean, myself, Christine Ekren are also a partner, MRIA here. December 2026, hopefully we will have an online open access module in a Canvas common cartridge, so it can be imported into anybody's online learning management system, available freely. And we'll also have workshop materials so that each of you can bring it back to your trial units or to those that you work with, and use the materials we develop to provide that training and education in your respective institutions as well. So that's probably a good place to maybe just ask each of our panel members one last thing, maybe a what's next question from the regulator. We'll start with Laura at the end.
What's next? Okay, so opportunities. Let's look at the bright side. I think to continue to have an open dialogue with all the parties involved is really key to keep the momentum on a topic like this. I think we could aim at having more flexible protocols designed that are more inclusive, and having a better use of the data or more data, I think has been also a recurrent theme that has been mentioned today, that at the moment we don't have a clear visibility of the status in the different member states. And also, if I talk about cities, for the data that we have there, they are not very granular. So at the moment, the system with the structured data cannot help us to have this detailed overview. Maybe with artificial intelligence, we can get more data from the protocols. I think there is some hope also on having more clinical trials with decentralized elements. That can be a possibility to have more inclusive clinical trials and reach out to a population that otherwise would not have the same opportunities. And I think would be good also to think globally. So let's be focused on Europe, but for example, the WHO has recently published this global action plan on strengthening the clinical trial environment, and they present 9 actions, and one of them is particularly on this topic. So it's good to have discussion at European level, but also keeping in mind what's happening globally and having a good dialogue. Yes, I will conclude again with this message. Thanks.
Thanks, Laura. Rosario?
Well, one of the key things that people we are all saying here is to increase the relevance of multidisciplinary groups, basic researchers and clinical researchers in these clinical trials. Everyone is doing a good job in this on. Also, I agree also that the data, the filtering the data and elaborating well the data, analyzing the data, how is that taken? Because if we are going to rely in the future on artificial intelligence, we must work on the data first a lot before, because in anything in the molecular data that we obtain and everything, all the environmental data that we take around each patient and everything, that should be taken into consideration a lot, because otherwise we will have a distortion of the reality of the things that we, in the future, as we think we are going to be rely in the artificial intelligence.
So dialogue and data. Daniel, 3Ds?
Well, generally speaking, and to be honest, to summarize, I think that we have to preserve that we have, to reinforce the emerging infrastructures and also what could be a seed to plant and to grow up, to empower patients, to take care of our system, national healthcare system, and also European healthcare system, to promote clinical scientific career, and to be very confident in scientific evidence. And as a funder agency, we have to be focused on evaluation, assessment, and don't be panicked to be wrong and to recreate, to redesign something that could be better. So that's my messages for the future.
Very good point. And Maria? So I think you say what's next, but it's already happening. It's already here. I think the train of inclusivity has already left the station, and it's full of wonderful passengers from different stakeholder groups. And we should invite more people to join this train, but it has already launched. It's going, and it's going fast. And I think we will get far.
Very, very insightful and inspiring. Fidelma, last word.
Yeah.
Typically to an Irish person.
So I think Europe is in a golden position currently based on what's happening on the other side of the Atlantic with US policies on EDI, funding of NIH, CDC, vaccination programs getting slashed. So I think Europe should take this golden opportunity, invest in EDI, invest more in clinical trials, and over the next 4 years become the go-to continent to do clinical trials. I think we have great energy, we have great investigators, we have great knowledge. I think we can do it with a little bit more funding from the EU. And my second point, if I may, is I'd like to see clinical trials. You know, if we're truly talking about inclusivity, I'd like to see clinical trials exiting level 4 hospitals, which really recruit a very tiny spectrum of a certain aspect of the disease you're looking at, and that the trials begin to recruit in community practices and in general practitioners to give a much broader cohort of the disease you're trying to influence by the clinical trial. So I think continuing to recruit at level 4 hospitals is just repeating what we've done for decades. You're doing a trial in a select population of the population you're going to be looking after. And that in itself, I think, is inclusivity. Thank you.
Thanks, Fidelma, and thanks to the panel. Can we give a round of applause to... So it's been very inspiring, and the panel made my job very easy. And maybe one day I can come back and do this job in Espanol. Thank you, everybody.